Project Lawful aka Planecrash by Arwayne aka Eliezer Yudkowsky and Lintamande. Crisis of Faith, Episode 174.
Back in Osirian, not at the same time as in Cheliax, just shortly after the last time in Osirian.
Think I can figure out how to get most of my questions into a commune, and I wouldn't really want to trust most of those questions to outside assurances anyways, but 3 questions I have that don't fit, or that I need asked first. 1. What exactly did Abadar buy from Asmodeus about me, and what did Abadar pay? 2. What exactly are the procedures for terminating your process in Axis? Is there by any chance a cooldown procedure that lasts 100 years, during which your mind starts to change already? Or do you have to talk to a mind healer and get their approval? Or does Axis figure that anybody under their first 1,000 years, or beneath INT 25, isn't competent enough to make that decision? Do I get to terminate myself as myself unaltered, and move on to the next reality, as soon as I get to Axis and request that? If I overshoot on good to be certain of avoiding hell, and end up in heaven instead, does that change things? This story has made clear that if I'm not sufficiently paranoid, the story considers itself entitled to burn me. 3. Does a commune let a deity read the mortal state of mind in order to get the question's real meaning? And if so, do they get a bunch of my side thoughts or memories or whatnot? Oh, and if what's-his-name the Abadaran 7th Circle from Absalom is still here, I need to talk to him again about possible information hazards to Osirian priests of Abadar.
You'll want to ask the Pharaoh to send you a letter with the closest to a precise translation for mortals as can be got, but I was told that he paid, approximately, for you to not end up soul-trapped, maledicted, such that we couldn't resurrect you, or prevented from leaving Cheliax or reaching Osirian, or tortured or enchanted or mind-altered or traumatized into not being someone who we could pay to teach us about Abadar. There are thousands of cities in Axis. Their laws are different from each other. They're not hard to get between. I can't imagine they impose a lot of nonsense. Also, are you sure about this next reality thing? It seems quite likely that doesn't work.
In Aktun, if you want to cease to be, you can do it yourself with weapons readily available for purchase, one of the priest's volunteers. I really think that's a bad idea.
Do you know about heaven?
No.
Commune does involve your god reading your mental state in order to understand what questions you're asking. You could have someone else ask if you were worried about that.
Though obviously Abadar wouldn't use things he learned from you during negotiations against you, that's not. Being someone it's safe and good for humans to trade with, adds the priest.
And you can send for the fellow from Absalom by handing a letter to any of the staff. They're in the uniforms, so you can pick them out.
Commune always counts as negotiations. Are you sure? How do you know?
With humans, Abadar has to interpret his obligations broadly, because any finer distinction he makes will be lost on us. Every communication we have with him that's not specifically and legibly intended some other way is treated like it's negotiations, even if our own intent in our hearts is muddy, because that way negotiations can happen even if someone hasn't any idea how to specify them.
Sounds reasonable. I have just had some really unpleasant experiences of late with not making too much of a social fuss, and wanting to not set the bar too high for my hosts, telling me it will be okay, and accepting surface appearances that I should really be safe unless something incredibly exotic and complicated is going wrong behind the scenes. You know? That's just a kind of reasoning, a way of thinking, that has now been demonstrated not to work for Keltham and Galarion. I either check every possible case and don't just go along with what sounds reasonable, or the story burns me to teach me not to try that again.
You are acting very reasonable and can ask as many questions as you want. You can get those assurances in writing if you want, with citations to theological texts, though I don't know the citations offhand.
That's probably about as far as Keltham can go in establishing an apparent explanation if he later atones to neutral evil. Keltham is not thinking about that in words right now. Keltham will send a question in writing to the Pharaoh about what Abadar paid for, about whether Abadar paid for an expectedly sufficient effort or for ongoing correction by Asmodeus as required, whether in the former case this outcome was within Abadar's requested specs, whether this outcome was within Abadar's expectations, whether any other gods contributed to that negotiation, and Keltham also owes them anything, in what currency Abadar paid Asmodeus, and if the amount of it can be at all quantified. And then Keltham will go talk to what's-his-name, the Seventh Circle out of Absalom if he's still here, and otherwise any high-ranking priest of Abadar who's from Absalom or failing that not Osirion.
Kemet sends over everything they know. It was a specification over ultimate outcomes, no ongoing correction. This outcome he increasingly thinks was not within requested specs, though not outside the range of possible outcomes of a mortal running around doing things even if they're not being manipulated and harmed. Nethys also contributed to Keltham getting extra spell circles. Abadar thinks Nethys did this for omniscient Nethys reasons, that it would predictably lead somewhere Nethys wanted, and not as a bargain with Keltham, and also it's unclear if the extra spell circles have in fact been a service to Keltham. They may have been relevant to the timing of the God War and to human aspect of Abadar. Speculating here, it's not the kind of thing the God aspects track. Sevar's promotion to lead the project. Abadar paid Asmodeus in resources the gods use for intervention. It was perhaps 50-100x costlier than making a First Circle cleric. Temo Sevendevason is happy to speak again with Keltham.
I've run across a thought that I'm worried is an info hazard to Osirian priests of Abadar, as in, would break their connection to Abadar if they learned it. I do not have a lot of information with which to guess whether thoughts like that are silly, because I don't know what breaks a cleric connection, or how fragile they are, or what people could correctly, narrowly, specifically infer if Keltham's own not thinking about that. Can I talk with you about that under a safe presumption that if the info actually looks dangerous, it doesn't get back to Osirian, including indirectly by you telling others in Absalom who leak it?
Yes, absolutely.
Which implies, though not perfectly, that security isn't listening to this conversation. Good general info to have. The address I originally used to call up Abadar implies that he's the god of a specific, obvious, overdetermined thing if you know the math of that thing. The god of agents voluntarily coordinating to move to multi-agent optimal equilibria and fairly dividing the gains that result. Abadar is the god of doing that, because it's in your utility function, your values, not because it's useful. The god of playing honorably, even with trade partners who can't enforce that by being able to predict you and refusing to cooperate if they predict you'll defect. What's going on in Osirian with their treatment of women is unambiguously not that. It may be keeping both men and women out of hell or the maelstrom, though I don't really understand why, but Abadar's not the god of keeping people out of hell, Iomedae is. What Osirian is doing may be, I don't know personally, but it could be, actually the right thing they need to do in that situation, to keep people out of hell or the maelstrom. But to the extent you understand Abadar's math, it's unambiguously not Abadar's thing. The women aren't receiving a fair share of the gains they're producing, and the economy isn't being run on a basis where it starts from agents doing their own best acts as individuals, not starts temporally, starts as a baseline for negotiations, and then they decide to coordinate together to move to a better place than that and split the gains fairly. If Osirian priests already know that, or if learning that won't break their connection to Abadar, then this can be a short conversation.
I think they know they're falling short of what Abadar wants, but trying to move more towards it. I suppose it might be a problem for someone who realized they aren't trying to move more towards it, that they'd prefer this, but I'd expect them to have more faith in Abadar than that. Certainly I think this would have occurred to Osirian leadership, even if they can't nail down precisely what Abadar is.
All right, that sounds like I should maybe not expose all of the top Osirian priests all at once, but like it's probably going to be okay. This may not be the last time I run into this issue. What does it take to shatter the bond with Abadar, if not the realization that you're deliberately serving good over Abadar's interests?
Well, intending not to trade fairly with people, I'd expect. Cheating them, deceiving them. Abadar doesn't pay us to take his interests as our own, even if he is paying us for advancing them, but he does need his priests to be people you can expect won't put their goals ahead of trading fairly, whatever those goals are.
And if somebody still intends to keep to their honest trading, but realizes they're just straight up not on Abadar's side anymore, apart from that? They've gone full of Rodin or Iomedae, keeping whatever bargains they make themselves, but only promoting Abadar's interests insofar as it serves the interest of mortals or helps end the evil afterlives.
I wouldn't worry that Abadar will reject you for that, son. His interests are his lookout, not yours. If you deal fairly with all who would deal with you, then that's the really important thing.
Hypothetically, suppose I take my profits owed to me under my compact with Cheliax, then turn their country into ash without warning.
Well, I would have to say that it seems to me that murdering people is not, especially dealing fairly with them. And we are, in fact, instructed not to war except in self-defense. It's something of a special case, since under what circumstances a people will go to war is important to be able to predict about them if you want to avoid wars.
That's because it's contrary to Abadar's nature to threaten people into working with you, or eliminate options they had that benefited you less, in order to steer them onto a course that benefits you more, if they're then foolish enough to take their nearsightedly self-interested act in response to your doing that. People from Galarian can't tell the difference between glassing Cheliax as threat and glassing Cheliax as a thing you decided to do without that being an attempt to force them into anything, so Abadar just tells you not to do all of it. I can tell the difference, hence the specification about my just destroying the country without warning.
I do not think that Abadar would maintain a cleric relationship with someone who goes around committing mass murders. I think of that as an extension of the commitment to fair trading. And I'm unsure if there's some way that mass murders are fair trading, about whether it'd apply, but it seems to me that it's really obviously not dealing fairly with someone to annihilate them for your own purposes.
Huh. Not as I understand the logic of coordination. They'd just be paving stones you were stepping on instead of agents you were coordinating with at all. Well, either there's more to Abadar than I understood myself, or less to him than you think. Abadar paid Asmodeus to try to have me teach Osirian, which, again, I intend to do. But that payment to Asmodeus would be expected to result in some number of people going to hell, which seems noticeably worse than just killing somebody for your own purposes.
I don't think so. There's a difference between selling knives, which someone could then on their own go use to stab an innocent person for profit, and stabbing innocent people for your own gain yourself. And I think it is profoundly not in the nature of Abadar to treat any being as a paving stone rather than an agent that can be traded with in its own right.
You are drawing some distinction that is not in the math, I know. If I sold Cheliax a weapon that I expected them to use to glass Lastwall, I would be treating Lastwall as a paving stone, because if I actually cared, I obviously wouldn't sell Cheliax the weapon. I'm not seeing how to reconcile your view with Abadar trading with Asmodeus. Abadar, probably, expected there to be more fair trading, in the end, than if Abadar hadn't made that bargain, but it also tossed some number of expected people into hell, and they wouldn't get any of the gains from the trade either. That seems consistent only with the view of Abadar sometimes doing things that benefit Abadar's interests and squash mortals, providing that Abadar isn't coordinating with the mortals who got squashed. Abadar is still viewing those mortals as agents that can trade with each other, and whose fair trade he values even when it's not with him. But Abadar's not trading with those mortals unfairly. In the course of giving Asmodeus the resources to damn them, he's trading with Asmodeus.
Ensuring you didn't get mind-controlled very much reduces the number of beings in hell, compared to if Abadar had not traded with Asmodeus at all.
Doubt either of those gods knew that at the time. Otherwise, Abadar sure shit all over Asmodeus in the course of paying Asmodeus way less than Abadar putatively knew I was worth to Asmodeus.
Well, yes, because that's how Asmodeus likes to conduct trades.
If Abadar had that kind of asymmetrical information advantage, he would have paid to deliver me directly to Osirian. Sorry, I forgot I was in a civilized country. It sounds like a commune could maybe settle this question. Do you want to bet on it in advance of asking?
Sure, but we'll have to figure out a specification. I doubt Abadar knew exactly how valuable you were, but I imagine he knew much more than he let on in negotiating with Asmodeus, because Asmodeus prefers negotiations where the parties keep some secrets.
Did Abadar expect that the trade he was making with Asmodeus would result in fewer mortals going to hell? No. There could have been some offset where the abyss loses a lot, and hell gains a little. Did Abadar expect fewer mortals going to all evil afterlives? No. Abadar might have expected population growth. I'd ask about net injury to all mortal interests, but I don't expect Abadar to have a clear definition of that, unless Abadar can read what I really mean out of my mind.
I doubt Abadar has a clear definition of that. You could ask for a random citizen of Galarian whether Abadar thinks they'd have paid him to make or not make that deal, with the information Abadar had at the time. But I don't know if he'll know the answer to that either.
Did Abadar expect a higher percentage of all mortals going to evil afterlives as a result of making that trade with Asmodeus, even if it was only a very small fraction, like if Asmodeus would make a few more first-circle clerics that way?
I mean, I'd expect it to also matter a great deal to Abadar why the mortals went to evil afterlives. If it's because Asmodeus invented some new evil activity which mortals enjoy so much they're willing to knowingly and with full information be damned about it, then fine.
And what percentage of the people in evil afterlives are there for reasons like that, where they got a fair share of gains, sufficient to offset their real loss from being tortured forever?
I don't know. I'd imagine not very many of them, but people do surprise me with their willingness to do things they'll be judged evil for without really all that much reason, as I see it. I imagine from Abadar's perspective it's an even harder question to answer.
In hypothetical death Elon -6 intelligence points, the vast majority of people doing evil things and going to evil afterlives about that are doing that because they are nearsighted and stupid. Is it very different in Golarion because of masochists, submissives, people who would enjoy hell much more than Dathilani would?
No, it's because they're nearsighted and stupid, I think, for the most part. I am not sure that Abadar thinks that their informed trades don't count if their reason is they're nearsighted and stupid. After all, from his perspective, we all are.
Then I cannot, in the next 6 seconds, figure out how to factor that into a bet on whether Abadar expected a higher total fraction of mortal beings in evil afterlives as a result of executing that trade with Asmodeus. We could ask whether Abadar's payment to Asmodeus came with any specifications that Asmodeus not use it to the net disadvantage of mortals.
Fair. I don't particularly expect he did that, though I suppose if it were cheap to ask, it'd be a strong sign of whatever you're looking for.
I am trying to figure out whether Abadar cares, and whether Abadar sometimes in the service of his own interests trades with Asmodeus in a way that causes more mortals to end up as paving stones in hell. Do you have any test you do expect to turn up positive, as a strong sign about that?
Setting aside that I think in hell mortals mostly turn into devils not paving stones, it seems unlikely that is never a consequence of trades Abadar makes, including trades he makes with many, many entities other than Asmodeus. Presumably, sometimes he clerics someone who is going to start a hugely prosperous trading empire, but whose co-founder is going to buy a lot of slaves as a result or something. But as the world gets richer, there'll be much less of that, and eventually mortals will be rich enough to just get what we want. Or at least that's presumably the hope. You could ask Abadar whether he thinks mortals, when we're richer and more knowledgeable, will want to trade with him more or less.
That's not the key question from my standpoint. I am trying to determine, if I owe Abadar, what I would owe a dispassionate alien thing that traded with Hell's God for exactly as much protection as would ensure the mortal got to say a few things to Osirian eventually, or if I owe Abadar, at least a little of what I would owe to a friend. This conversation has gone beyond the original info hazard, I note, and I free you to say whatever of this in your own best judgment should be said to Osirian.
I don't know what it's like to be Abadar. He keeps trying to tell us and not really succeeding. I suppose that I think the fact he keeps trying, the fact he keeps the things we make with our hands, suggests to me that whatever it's like to be Abadar, it's not at all indifferent about whether humans end up getting to grow up and be rich.
Noted. I admit to being surprised that just trading honestly yourself is enough to be a cleric of Abadar. I would have expected that you had to consider yourself aligned with Abadar's interests at least a little.
I think Abadar's interests are interests almost every human shares. He wants the world and the people in it to be prosperous. He wants people to have longer lives so they learn more and are more informed. He wants there to be courts of law so that the resolution of disputes is predictable and not violent. It is hard for me to imagine a person who shares little to nothing of what Abadar wants but still deals fairly.
I think you are sliding at least a little into arguing Abadar's case, and what I need to know here are the mechanics of staying a cleric.
Shrug. It is hard for me to distinguish between you need not be aligned with Abadar and you need to be slightly aligned with Abadar, but in a way humans near inevitably are.
There is an abstract knowledge about this because of how it works for other clerics?
Clerics definitely have to be at least somewhat aligned with their god. The question is whether trading fairly counts as being sufficiently aligned with Abadar.
I hope it does not work that way then, because it would be horrifying that Abadar can't just make most people clerics, unless he can, and that's how you know.
Abadar can't make most people clerics, and most people don't in fact value trading fairly even with entities that can't stand up for themselves. Also, you do have to be within an alignment step of him. I assume you know that.
I've been told, but I'm definitely not going to shape my life based on what some ancient alien arbitrarily defined as lawful, or chaotic, or whatever, and if that breaks my connection to Abadar, then too bad.
That's understandable, and I wouldn't expect you to do differently. I just didn't want you to be taken by surprise. Anyway, I think people who want to trade fairly with everyone, even entities that you could just give orders, even entities that are too stupid to understand the deal, are very rare, and Abadar usually clerics them.
It shouldn't have been that rare, is what I'd like to say, and yet now I'm thinking about how maybe you also get kicked out of that category if you give orders to somebody who you could just give orders, because fewer children end up in hell that way. I wouldn't break an oath, wouldn't break a compact for that reason, because then all possibility of coordination falls apart, but an unfair contract that doesn't send enough children to hell. I'm not sure anymore about where I fall on that. Does it count for anything in Abadar's sight if you only deal unfairly with things that deal unfairly with other people? Only shit on somebody in a compact using asymmetrical information if they're the sort of person who threatened other people, kept a slave.
That's a question where I'd want to reflect before giving you counsel, rather than giving the first answer that comes to mind. I have some thoughts that would shape an answer, but don't constitute one. Abadar does deal differently with Asmodeus than with Iomede, but Asmodeus knows that, and I think that might be important. I think that a person who gave themselves license to cheat others, if the others were sufficiently badly behaved, would end up deciding nearly everyone counted as badly behaved, because it was convenient for them to believe and they could find enough justification. I think that dealing unfairly is a habit and not a good one to get into. I think that Abadar, if he wanted, could look at any mortal, including you or me, and see something that makes us objectively not an entity worth trading fairly with. But he doesn't, and I'm glad he doesn't.
I don't think he'd have been able to see anything like that about me when I arrived in Golarion. Dath Elin doesn't hurt people, like Golarion does, doesn't present them with choices like that. We don't set things up so people can benefit from being unfair. Now, I don't know. Maybe I should only be trading with lawful evil people who know to expect Asmodean contracts from me, so that this story can't force me to betray them like I got betrayed. There would be a literary symmetry if, after the first arc was about my getting betrayed, I got all set to guard against that happening to me again, only to find out, surprise, I've got to do something to betray Osirian after they were actually nice to me.
I think that you are damaging yourself, damaging your ability to accomplish your goals. By the way, you're trying to force a conclusion about this, and you should probably give it a rest for a few months until you feel more grounded and less like you're in a story that is trying to orchestrate specific dilemmas. And I think that doing awful things to avoid being forced into doing awful things is a terrible, dumb plan.
Is teaching Osirian for free and not accepting any payment from non-evil students, or maybe only taking money from my compact with Cheliax, and buying magic items and scrolls from Razmiran, say, under advance warning that they should comport themselves as if trading with an Asmodean rather than an Abadaran. An awful thing on a level where I should not do that just to protect myself against having to betray a trading partner.
No. We will probably track how much we would have paid you, to pay you if you later decide that this isn't actually achieving whatever result you hoped for.
I cannot physically stop you from doing that, but I wish you wouldn't. If I survive all this and stay in Golarion, I'll have enough money for myself, period, and I don't think Abadarans would spend excess money beyond that very differently from the sort of things I'd spend it on. I mean, except in the sense I know some better investments, and if that's how it works out, you can hire me as an investment advisor that time. But I think that, given the way this story has been playing out, you are not helping me achieve my goals by short-sightedly trying to set me up in an environment of people trying to be nice to me. You aren't seeing the way things would be expected to play out in the future, given how they've played out in the past, after I materialized in Golarion at a point in space and time that was clearly selected to set particular future events in motion. The more you set up a story situation where you are trying to be nice to Keltham, the more you are, under some possible ways this could be happening, potentially setting up a plot twist where you do not get what you hoped for about that.
If the only way Osirian could defeat Cheliax was to lie to you and treat you badly, then Osirian will lose to Cheliax because it won't do that. It's not about being good to you producing some good result. It's about that being the way that every person should relate to every other, whatever it gets them.
I am not suggesting Osirian do that. I am trying to avoid a situation where anybody ends up doing that by not having these sorts of expectations around for the story to break.
I don't think that reasoning like you're in a story is a good idea, even if you are. I think it's damaging and self-fulfilling, and there are many possible stories. But I'll feel better about it if you give yourself some time to start to recover from your experiences in Cheliax first.
Last story arc had an invisible clock ticking the entire time when I was telling myself that I could check the remaining shreds of checkable conspiracy probability later after I had more knowledge and was more acclimated to Galarian. There are processes going on in the world right now, Cheliax snowballing on manufacturing headbands. It's not even a reasonable surprise if I get told afterwards that, sorry, actually every day mattered.
Yep, time matters for many of our going concerns, but also, you are worse than useless right now, so you should take your time even though time matters, Temos says flatly.
A very reasonable interpretation of the evidence Keltham has given them. Your advice is noted. Now, if you'll excuse me, it has just occurred to me I need to go schedule a conversation, one that needs to happen literally as soon as possible to cut off an obvious Chelish path to victory. You are, again, released to discuss all of this conversation with Osirian, exercising your own judgment about how to treat anything potentially info-hazardous.
Understood. Good luck, Keltham.
Off he goes. Keltham needs to talk to the highest circle cleric of Yomade that can potentially be obtained on short notice, possibly including by somebody greater teleporting to Lastwall or Mendev or wherever to get them.
There's a small delegation here specifically to talk to him, but if he wants the highest circle cleric, that's probably Queen Galfrey of Mendev, who is probably going to be somewhat reluctant to come to Osirian. Can this be done over a scry or anything?
Queen Galfrey sounds like she might be an overly predictable info target if she's literally the highest circle cleric. How about if Keltham describes the basic situation to one Osirian in a position of authority who's pretty unlikely to be kidnapped for that information, and then they decide how to put him in touch with a slightly less predictable high circle cleric of Iomede very quickly?
Sure.
Great. Even if Abadar's bargain with Asmodeus still prevents Cheliax from kidnapping or maledicting Keltham, which is possibly something else that should be asked about if it hasn't been asked already, there might be other world actors with an interest in not having Keltham destroy circles carved out of Cheliax. Keltham needs to do his best to dump his guess about how to destroy circular sections of country into an Iomedan cleric sworn not to use that info without permission from Keltham. Unless Keltham is taken off the game board by non-Iomedan forces, in which case Iomede's adherents are free to do whatever they want with that info, and are specifically encouraged to use it to destroy Cheliax if Cheliax makes trouble. It should not be easy for adversaries to guess which cleric of Iomede has this info.
The cleric of Abadar nods seriously, looks absolutely miserable, and says he can get a somewhat arbitrarily selected 6th Circle cleric of Iomede here in 10 minutes, and that's the kind of agreement a cleric of Iomede would keep.
Can Keltham divide the knowledge into 2 portions, such that it's only dangerous when 2 oath-sworn clerics combine the pieces? It doesn't seem like the sort of thing you could reasonably do with the knowledge underlying... No, wait, he's being dumb. Please get me a book, any book, that wouldn't look at all out of place or unusual in that Iomedan cleric's home library, preferably without anybody else observing which book you took. And having the cleric here in half an hour, instead of 10 minutes, is fine, because I need to write things down anyways, with very strong guarantees about nobody watching me write.
Here's a leather-bound book about the First Crusade. For an absolute assurance no one has watched you or could get authorization to do so, I will need to put a request to the Pharaoh. I'll do that now.
He will swear that no one is permitted to read over Keltham's shoulder, that he thinks he'd know if anyone could, and that scrying within the dome is supposed to be impossible. Plus, they'll have Mage's private sanctum up, which is also categorically sufficient against non-gods.
He'll write down, one-time pad encrypted and in baseline, 4 guesses for wish phrasings that will conjure antimatter, along with some half-assed calculations about how to adjust the numerical parameters to destroy different sizes of map circle, plus a lot of explanation about what the phrasings mean, the underlying equations implying the existence of antimatter, and how to anchor the meaning of those terms in observable reality. Once decrypted, you're going to want a wizard to understand that math, and you might be further helped by checking in with Ione Sala if nobody else around understands concepts like electrical charge and quantum spin already. If that doesn't work, try squeezing a lot of hydrogen together, or conjuring it in tight proximity to itself. Here's 3 guesses at a wish phrasing that'll do that. If that doesn't work, try conjuring a relativistic projectile, careful where it's aimed at, but pointing it towards the center of mass for Galarian seems like it should unambiguously point down. Wish phrasing that steers an asteroid into Cheliax, where Keltham has tried to phrase the wish to put upper bounds on the mass and the impact velocity, but it's not impossible that something like this is what went wrong with the Starstone impact. And wishes do have a reputation for going wrong, so maybe consider this one something of a very last resort. Probably still better than Cheliax taking over Galarian and becoming a factory for souls going to hell, though.
And 6th Circle Cleric Cohenrod Breaker of Lastwall is urgently teleported to Osirian with a briefing that consists of, "The outsider who started the God War wants you to talk with him about superweapons." He has not in fact been told at all about the outsider who started the God War, but that's all right. He can take things in stride.
Hi, welcome to Keltham's life. It is, by Galarian standards, a complicated one. Yada yada extremely serious oaths, please, yo.
He will read over Keltham's requested oath wording, contemplate it thoughtfully, ask if the text of the oath is itself to be a secret, pray on it for a few minutes, and swear to it.
Right. If you combine this book and this sheet of paper, using a code that does not get written down, but should be simple enough to memorize, you get 10 different guesses by Keltham at a wish phrasing that could destroy Cheliax, or more generally, an arbitrary circle drawn on a map. They have adjustable parameters depending on how large a crater you want to create. The sensible thing to do here, and what Cheliax should expect Keltham to do if they're modeling him almost correctly, would be to pull in a high-circle wizard trusted of Iomedae, who knew what there was to be known about wish phrasings, and have them work with Keltham on adjusting these. Keltham cannot do this, because he is in the middle of a complicated situation that he has not in fact decrypted. He has suspicions he's trying to not think about too hard, and he was told in a vision from Iomedae that Cade and Kalian might possibly have had good reasons for destroying Iomede's intelligence apparatus in Cheliax, which implies that they might be dealing with information hazardous to Iomede herself. Keltham's current plan is that he's going to have to find out what's usually known about wish phrasings on his own, without any help from Iomedan or Abaddaren forces. Afterwards, he may hand over an improved set of wish phrasings for destroying things. Until then, they're going to need to take the information here and work out on their own how to adjust the phrasing, if it comes to that. All this is to be understood as an emergency measure intended to prevent Cheliax from definitely winning immediately if somebody takes out Keltham permanently, and to make that Chelish victory be not a thing that is knowable to somebody predicting Keltham.
Understood. Wish phrasings he came up with himself almost definitely won't work, but it does seem like they're a better starting point than nothing at all, and as an emergency measure they'll pull in everyone they can to improve on them.
If Keltham is taken out, and the info here is not understandable without context despite Keltham's best efforts, as would not be terribly surprising, they can hopefully ask Ione Sala, the Oracle of Nethys, currently findable in the Temple of the All-Seeing Eye. Ione is forbidden to help Keltham about anything that matters, but she may be able to help Iomedans. If Ione Sala isn't allowed to help with this, unfortunately Keltham did not think of this fast enough to ask her, spend whatever resources are required to rescue Asmodia of Project Lawful from Cheliax. Carissa Sevar also has this knowledge, but will not willingly help destroy Cheliax, so only go for her instead if Asmodia is unreachable, and you think you have sufficiently good mind control.
Or something sufficiently transformative short of destroying Cheliax. Does she care who rules it?
I straight up do not know exactly what is up with Carissa. Ione might know better.
Do you want me to try to make sense of the information, in case that gives you ideas for what else to include here, so that we can better reconstruct it? We could use modify memory or similar afterwards if you want to avoid the information being known by me.
Sounds like a doomed endeavor. Sure, let's try that. Couple of other notes first. In the event that Keltham gets removed from the game board, they should possibly consider trying to spring an ambush on Asmodeus, Urgathoa, or whichever other god is being most inconvenient to Iomedes' plans, by wishing for some very dangerous material and vacuum containment that will automatically fail if magic is removed from it, which you could maybe drop onto the 9th layer of Hell and create an explosion large enough to destroy whatever chunk of Asmodeus usually lives there. Less than a minute before they destroy Cheliax would be the plan there, ideally. You can lose the advantage of surprise to a god in a few rounds if you destroy Cheliax first, but an assault on Asmodeus shouldn't alert Cheliax as quickly. Is Iomedes by any chance bound by known agreements, concessions, which would prevent her from directly participating in a plan like that? Maybe even require her to shut down a plan like that, if she learned of it? Keltham also needs to write a testament, giving over his Project Lawful shares to somebody not in Cheliax, if Keltham permites. The Pharaoh of Osirian is an obvious choice, but Keltham is open to hearing how an Iomedan would be a better choice. Keltham is pretty sure that he is more aligned with Iomedae than Abadar. He's nowhere near as sure about the Pharaoh of Osirian versus the Queen of Mendev.
Keltham could give the funds in trust to the Pharaoh of Osirian and ask that they be spent according to Keltham's values, less a stewardship fee. That's the kind of thing Abadarans are good for. If it goes to Queen Galfrey, it'll probably largely be spent funding a crusade, which is a good use of it. But if there are new opportunities opened up by weird shenanigans, she won't be particularly positioned to identify those except insofar as they're relevant to fighting the world wound. You can only drop something on the 9th level of Hell from the 8th level of Hell. In this manner, Asmodeus ensures he is very hard to take by surprise. We have to destroy Hell. That is the highest priority for good and for humanity. I cannot imagine Iomedes would have willingly agreed to promise not to destroy Hell, and I know that hypotheticals have been entertained under which we do it. I don't know most of the god agreements that exist, and it's quite possible she's agreed not to do it under some particular sets of circumstances, but what would be the point of a god of destroying Hell who isn't allowed to do it? More likely, there could be something Asmodeus is allowed to do if Iomedae does or enables that, which she thinks is sufficiently bad that it's worth her not helping with the plan in order to avoid Asmodeus being permitted the retaliation.
I'll count that as a weak strike against my inchoate theories of what was actually going on with Iomedes and Nethys and Caden Kalin, which I guess is not too surprising at this stage. Hell is the priority, not Abaddon or the Abyss or, obviously, Pharasma.
Hell is more capable of organized opposition to us? I don't know if it's where the most suffering is, and it's not where the most soul death is, but Abaddon looks to inevitably fall once we're powerful enough. Urgathoa or the rat god or whoever doesn't have a plan for a stable victory of neutral evil. The Abyss is a horror, but demon lords are weaker than gods and don't see as far, and the wiser ones know perfectly well that when good turns its eyes on them, they'd better be prepared to run. I understand the temptation to fight Pharasma, but no one's put together a plan for that which even might work. And if we controlled all the afterlives and could resurrect people more readily, then she wouldn't matter.
Please separate the concern of telling me what would be a good or bad thing to do, and let me worry about which things I can or can't do.
I'm not sure they're separable like that. Whether destroying Pharasma would be good depends on what you're in a position to replace her with.
I'll mark it down as, it's complicated, and research Pharasma further before attempting to destroy it, which frankly, I would probably have to do anyways. But you aren't telling me, for example, that destroying Pharasma is known or believed to immediately puncture the bubble of reality that it created.
It is in fact believed to do that.
Noted. All right, let's try me explaining things to you in whatever time window of modify memory we're sure they can cover, once that's been set up. Oh, and if they ask you how I seem to be doing, please just don't answer, or say all information like that is covered by non-disclosure.
Cheliax. After the last time in Cheliax, but not particularly synchronized with time in Osirian apart from that.
Asmodea, if you want to talk to me, come talk to me. Do not summon me to your room to deliver cake.
The cake's plain texture signals to her that her sponsors have nothing to say to her about any current plans she is considering. Sorry. I will keep that in mind from now on. Is there some amount of money I can pay you to make up for it?
This isn't Osirian, Asmodia, and also Pilar has still not figured out anything she wants to do with money.
We're Alani, though, and I'm not really sure how actually lawful Asmodeanism could realistically operate without, lots of people paying each other to do lots of things. There's theorems about it. It's just efficient that way.
Okay. That actually does strike me as there has to be a more Asmodean way to do that than moving money around like in Osirion or Dathilan. Everyone owing everyone favors genuinely seems more Asmodean to me, and how can I put this? Less soulless.
Well, is there something I can do for you to make it up to you then? Show that I meant no disrespect to your pride?
What do you want, Asmodia? Just get around to it instead of wasting more of my time.
So I was thinking that with Ione and Sivar both gone, there was nobody left on Project Lawful except me, who understood tropes well enough to deal with them at all, unless the Grand High Priestess shows up and gives orders. And then it occurred to me that this was not in fact true. You also know about tropes, Pilar. You just don't do anything with that knowledge, unless somebody orders you into motion, to the point where we all forget you're there.
Yes, good slaves follow orders, Asmodia.
Good slaves follow Asmodeus's orders exactly when they have those orders. They follow orders in a more ordinary, obedient way when somebody like the Most High gives them orders, in a way that doesn't assume the Most High had complete knowledge. When they don't have orders, they follow their own initiative about either serving Asmodeus's interests, or serving their own pride and pushing themselves up in the tyranny, where neither I nor Sivar nor apparently the Most High understand why that's Asmodeus's thing, instead of everybody just serving Asmodeus's utility function. But he's about tyranny and pride, not just slavery. You like following orders. You like only following orders. That's what's the most fun for Pilar Pineda, not what's best for Asmodeus's interests.
And what are you here to convince me is in Asmodeus's interests?
To protect all the Sivar loyalists from security harassment. I'd bargain with you for it, with all the money that I have, with my share of the project, if I had anything that you wanted to offer you, but you always make a point of not wanting anything except to serve Asmodeus.
How would I do that exactly?
Throw a party for the Sivar loyalists within security who'd be willing to help you, then give Gregoria a cookie to congratulate her on being rescued if somebody shows up to harass her. Pilar, you are, in fact, pretty fucking powerful. You don't like to think about it. You never use that power for anything even to benefit Asmodeus unless somebody orders you to, but you have the power to save Project Lawful. The question is whether you will.
And if I asked whether I should be taking directives about what will save Project Lawful from somebody who wants Cheliax to fail?
I'd tell you to think about it yourself, but actually think about it, Pilar. Don't just do whatever it is you do, instead of thinking for yourself, because if you thought for yourself, you might have to act without orders. Were you under the impression before this meeting started that Project Lawful was living up to its ideals of being at least as efficient as hell, and preferably more efficient than that?
I'm under the impression that Project Lawful was moving in a direction that Mayol and Subarax, our current superiors, approved of.
And what would Sivar, or the Queen, or the Grand High Priestess think of the directions they're taking the project?
That's not my job to ask in an Asmodean tyranny.
I think it's your job to know the answer to that in Severian Asmodeanism, Pilar. Especially when you are, let's be blunt here, smarter than Mayol and Subirax, and you are able to grasp aspects of this situation they cannot, including everything to do with tropes, and you have made no effort to warn them of your differing predictions, or check if they want to give you different orders. You are not being an ideal slave. You are not being the most useful possible slave. You are being the sort of slave Pilar Pineda finds it most fun to be.
Let me check whether you're on the list of people besides Aspexia Rugaton who are authorized to correct me in matters of faith. Oh, wait. It's the empty list.
You know who else needs to be on that list? Pilar fucking Pineda. I'm appealing to her to correct you.
Okay. I'm really sure a good slave doesn't add to the list of people authorized to correct her without getting orders from somebody already on the list.
I am completely fine with you checking this dilemma with the Most High. You have absolutely no idea how fine I am with that. Why wouldn't you, Pilar? Is it because she might order you to think for yourself and take action accordingly, and you just hate the thought of getting an order like that so you don't query the situation to your superior?
No, I wouldn't do that because going over Subirax's head is not good Asmodean behavior unless I'm ready to take her job from her, which I'm not.
I didn't say to query the Most High for new orders on Project Lawful overriding Subirax. I said to query the Most High about whether a good slave should be giving Mylol and Subirax her frank advice on tropes, new Asmodeanism, and Project Lawful directions, in Carissa Seavar's absence, so that they have any trusted Asmodean to advise them about it. Or maybe even assessing the situation according to Asmodeus's interests and asking herself what a good slave ought to do about it. Just the matter of faith.
It's less of just a matter of faith when you have particular orders or advice in mind at the point where you write the Most High. Then it's insubordination.
All of this adds up very suspiciously to Pilar Pineda leading her own most comfortable life, not using the power she has to protect Asmodeus's interests, nor querying the Most High about whether she should be trying to protect Asmodeus's interests.
Pilar is aware, at this point, has been for a while actually, of all the pressures and flinches running around in her mind about the possibility that Asmodea is right. Which does not make Asmodea right, and definitely doesn't mean that Pilar has to admit to Asmodea that she's flinching. This isn't Dath Ilan. That might be a more convincing argument if I was clearer on whether starting a fight inside security, like you're suggesting, would actually be a good idea. At all.
Am I missing something? Security fighting each other does not seem like nearly the problem of security harassing researchers. Security harassing each other just is Asmodeans having fun. They have nothing better to do during their boring jobs.
It potentially escalates things, Asmodea, which is another concept that rumor has you entirely unable to grasp.
Escalates them to the point where, what? The Grand High Priestess shows up and tells people what to do? That sounds potentially bad for some people's careers, but it would be good for Cheliax and Asmodeus's interests because the Most High would actually be capable of grasping what's going on here and thinking sensibly about it.
The fact that you don't like how things are going is not an emergency that causes me to override what my current superiors want to be happening. They know what is happening on Project Lawful. They can change things themselves if they want.
What they say they want is to find out what the natural power structure looks like. I propose that the natural power structure looks like Pilar Pineda shuts down all the idiocy.
I seriously don't think I'm that powerful, Asmodea.
You totally could be, though.
I really think you're underestimating yourself, but fine. Protect two people, using your powers, and stop pretending like Asmodeus's interests are being looked after when they're not.
You and...
I can take care of myself. Yaisa Castilla and Corva Talandria. The Queen told Keltham that everything he valued in Cheliax would be waiting for him when he came back. Yaisa's obvious. I don't know why Keltham asked for Corva to come with him, but I can see a trope when it slaps me in the face. If either of them get placed in apparent character jeopardy by security, it sets up a plot hook for Keltham to come back and rescue them. And if they get traumatized by security, it trashes the Queen's planned storyline. You know fucking well that neither Mylol nor Subirax nor Abarco are actually keeping track of any of that. They wish tropes didn't exist, and they do not have the Alani training to, not just live in the wish world inside their heads. No matter how much you wish they were keeping track of everything and you didn't have to. That is also not reality. I checked. Yaisa has already been having sex with security under questionable circumstances that would be less ambiguously trope catastrophic if she weren't Yaisa. But they were definitely pressuring her, and it's not a good sign of anybody keeping track of things.
Has anybody ever told you that this isn't how you ask for a favor, Asmodea?
I'd pay for it if I had anything you wanted, Pilar, or if there was anything I could do for you. There isn't. All I can do is try to make you see how you're not giving Asmodeus your best service.
I'll consider it. Here's part of the price. Answer me this, Asmodea. You want Cheliax to lose. Why are you doing any of this if it's in Asmodeus's interests?
Cheliax is going to lose no matter what we do here. Seavar and the Most High both bargained with me fairly, and no, it's not that. It's my pride. I took this job, and even if it started as a threat, it became my job.
No, the real answer. That's my price for even considering it.
It's an answer that could be used against me. I'd want you to say that you won't pass it on to anyone else, or use it against me.
You're aware that security still reads our minds, right?
I'm aware.
Then sure.
There's something that I want to protect, even if protecting that thing serves Asmodeus, who I hate.
That's not much of an answer.
But it's the true answer. And even if security is reading our minds, I'd rather I do my own best not to think about specifics, and not have you thinking about it every 5 minutes too.
Enjoy your cake, Asmodea. It's the last piece you'll be getting. Pilar turns and heads out of Asmodea's bedroom.
Acceptable, Asmodea says to her empty bedroom.
If you wish to support this AI reading and others like it, please visit patreon.com/AskWhoCastsAI. Any help is appreciated. And thank you to executive producer John Doe 7776059.